Well, I'd like to wish you all a happy, happy New Year. So, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Yes, I'm a little silly, but here's the thing. I think for most of us, this is the beginning of the new year. I think for many of us, we look at this school year, we look at this fresh start. Now, it doesn't feel like it today, but soon we are going to be in the cool season of the fall harvest. It is a time, I think, to stop and to pause and to ask yourself, how do I actually want to live this year? Like, how do I make this where life is not done to me, but I am doing what I'm called to do? How do I make this a season in my life where I am living a significant life for God? Well, many of us know that if we're not disciplined, if we don't have a schedule, if we just let everything fill in, we'll never do the things that really matter, that are most important. And so we need to decide what gets fitted in and what doesn't, and we need to schedule our calendar. And so that's a good first step. But before you know it, if you're like me, your calendar begins to look a lot like this, right? It just begins to get overwhelming. And then before you know it, you feel like this. Now, if that's not bad enough, I think some of you might even feel more like this. You know, like you're trying to do your thing, but somebody else is getting in the way. Or you ended up on somebody else's hamster wheel. Like, why is their agenda driving your life? And so I think the truth is that a lot of us already, it's September 10th, only September 10th, and yet I think a lot of us are already feeling stressed out, overwhelmed. So here's what I want to do. I want to give you 1 minute of peace right now. 1 minute. I want you to take a time out with me. Right here, right now, in the middle of my sermon, I'm going to ask you, if you're willing, to just trust me, close your eyes with me, and do this. Just try this. Take a slow, deep breath in. Take a slow, deep breath out. Now keep your eyes closed until you hear the music, and then just rest in it. Okay, here we go. How do I have a centered, well-paced, anchored, intentional, deliberate life this fall? With so many things pulling at me, so many things pulling to scatter me, to make me rushed, to make me self-absorbed, to make me flit from thing to thing. Well, I think that there are 3 lessons that we can learn from my favorite place in the world, which is my vineyard. I think there's 3 lessons we can learn from a vineyard on how to have a bountiful harvest this fall. And so last Sunday after church, I drove up to my parents' home in New Jersey, up to our family farm, to hang out with my mom and also just see how my vineyard was doing. And I looked at these grapes and they were looking great, but here's the deal. It's exactly now that farmers like me have to really work and take the right steps and make the right moves if we're going to have a great harvest at the end of the fall. If I'm just passive now, if I don't pay attention, if I just let things unfold, things are going to fall apart. And all the hard work I've done up until this moment, it's going to be lost, and the crop is going to be ruined. And there are three primary things about this vineyard. And of those three, there's two things that I do to make sure I can have the best possible harvest at the end of the fall. I think these three things are three things you can do to take care of the vineyard of your own life, the vineyard of your own soul, so that when you get to the end of the fall, when you're at Thanksgiving, you can look back upon this time and actually have something to give thanks for. You can look back at Thanksgiving and go, I lived deliberately this fall. I lived for God this fall. Well, how do we do that? How do we take those steps? Well, here's the first one. Here's the first thing I need to do. I need to constantly return to my utter dependence on God. Now that sounds basic. I mean, think about the vineyard. God gives the sun, God gives the rain, God gives the soil, God gives the vine. Like, God gives all that. It's the same with the vineyard of my life, but I tend to forget it. Like, if you ask me, like, well, Langdon, you're a pastor, aren't you utterly dependent on God? I would say, of course I am, but do I really live that way? Like, do you live through your day with this stance? I am utterly dependent on you, Lord. I'm utterly dependent on you for everything. You see, that vine has to be anchored in something, and I need to grow out of being rooted. I need to be utterly dependent on God. Listen to what Jesus says in John chapter 15, verse 5. He says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me, and I in him, he will bear much fruit. She will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So here's what I want you to get. In my vineyard, I have a vine that's a trunk. It's big and it's old and it's been there a long time. And then every year, new branches grow on it. God the Father is the ground of being. Jesus is the vine rooted in God the Father and his love of the Father. We are the branches. Jesus is the mediator between the God who is the ground of being and us. And he's saying, when I'm in you and you are me, in other words, all these nutrients are coming for us. Jesus is God in flesh. He is the God-man who mediates between me and the maker of heaven and earth. And when I'm connected to Jesus, I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I can grow and flourish. In my vineyard, if I cut one of those branches off, it looks okay for about a couple hours, and then it begins to wither. So think about us, though. I don't think it's as obvious for us. Are you truly rooted and grounded in Jesus? Are you utterly dependent on God? Or are you like the branch that gets cut off? Like, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to set up shop on my own. Or I think I'm going to be the cruise director of my own life. I'm just going to set up shop over here. Well, you're not rooted to anything, and after a while, that whole thing wilts. Or maybe what I do is I graft myself not into the true vine, but into something false, like fake, and a substitution. Like maybe like what the foundation of my life is my accomplishments, my abilities. Maybe it's my pride in who I am. Maybe it's how other people treat me. Maybe it's how much stuff I have. Maybe it's just desires. Like I'm just driven by my desires, like whatever I want. Like I have no root. I'm not connected. I just kind of drift. Am I truly, utterly dependent on God? Yes, but in my head, am I utterly dependent on God? Well, what does that mean? Well, let me say this. Have you ever been in a church where the pastor asks you to repeat a phrase like, hey, say with me, blah, blah, blah? I tend to not like that. I do not like it when pastors ask me to repeat after them because it feels a little bit controlling to me. So I want to ask you to repeat something after me right now. And the reason for it, though, is not to be controlling. The reason is I want you to notice how you feel when you say it. I'm going to ask you on the count of 3 to say with me, I am utterly dependent on God, if that's where if you're willing. Okay, I'm utterly dependent on God. And just listen to your own voice and notice how you feel. 1, 2, 3. I am utterly dependent on God. How did that feel? I'd like you to pay attention to that. Well, what does it mean to be utterly dependent on God? Certainly it means that I trust God. Like, God, I'm trusting you with my future. My times are in your hands. I am trusting you with this life of mine. It means that. But you know what else it means? I give God permission to tell me what to do. I give God permission to tell me what to do. Almost sounds blasphemous. What do you mean give God permission? No, I need to do that. Do you give God permission to tell you what to do? Is that where you are on your spiritual journey yet? So that first thing is first. This fall, I'm going to try and remember, because I've been doing this almost every morning. I have to, wait, Langdon, wait, stop. He's the creator, you're the creature. I'm utterly dependent on you, God. Help me to live as if I'm utterly dependent on you. That's the first thing. Look at the vine. God gave it. Look at the sky. Look at the water. Look at the rain. Look at the dirt. It's all from God. It's all gift. Now, though, there's more. There's 2 more things. Because the Bible also talks a lot about not just the vine, but the vineyard and the farmer and the role of tending and keeping the vineyard. Think about the Garden of Eden. We studied Genesis this last month, and what do we find? God provided it all. They were utterly dependent on him. He gave the garden, but then he told them they had to tend it. In the same way, God gave you your life, but he's calling you to tend the vineyard of your life, tend the vineyard of your soul. You have a responsibility to do that, and God has given you that responsibility. So, what are these things that need to be done? Well, I'm going to share with you 2 things that I do in my vineyard that make all the difference. The first thing is I need to train the branches up in the way that they should go. So if you've ever been to a vineyard, you see we have wire trellises at different heights. And the idea is as those branches grow, we train them up on those wires up toward the sun. Why? Because they don't have enough strength to hold themselves up. They literally flop over. And what happens when a branch flops over is then it crawls along the ground. It never reaches its true potential. And when it's down on the ground, that's where the bugs are, that's where the diseases are, and it's far away from the sun. So when it's laying down there, it's stunted, it's diseased, and it never knows the joy of what it's like to be trained up to the sun. So I literally have to pull them against their nature. I have to pull them up and tie them to train them, discipline them up. So, listen now to our scripture for this morning in Hebrews chapter 12. It says, "No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful." So think about running, think about working out, think about saving money. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who've been trained by it. Think about that. Wouldn't you want this fall to be marked by you looking back and going, I lived a life of righteousness and I lived a life of peace. Righteousness and peace. Discipline now leads to a harvest later. What I sow now affects what I will reap later. Now think about your actual wildflowers. Like Ruth and I, a bunch of you guys, we have a lot of black-eyed Susans. They're all starting to dry up, right? When does a wildflower sow its seeds? Pam, you should be giving this talk. In the fall. The fall is the time to sow, not the spring. Now is the time to sow for growth in the future of your year. This is the time to sow. When we choose to live the Jesus way now, we're sowing, investing in our future. And note that word trained. In other words, we need to have consistent habits. If I run once a month, I'll never get in great shape, even though I go through agony. And this, I'm talking from life experience, I run once and it's terrible and it's no good for me because I don't get any better. Why? Research continues to come out, even in the last year, about the way your body works, the way your brain works, the way your soul works, the way your emotions work. And it's this: the only way you ever get to a new normal is if it's repetitive and consistent over time. If it's all over the place, your body never learns. Your emotions never learn. Your brain never learns. It's got to be. And what's happening is, as you do things consistently, as you do them religiously, like if I'm running every day, my body's like, oh, this is the new normal. I need to adapt to that. My emotions are like, my soul, this is the new normal. Unless I do it consistently, habitually, over and over again, I never bump up into a new normal. That's why we're called to have this kind of discipline. But there's a problem with this. I don't like it. I don't like discipline. I also don't like being utterly dependent. I don't like it. It makes me feel weak and small. Utterly dependent makes me feel irresponsible. Turns out it's the most responsible thing I could do. Face reality. You're utterly dependent. Yeah, but I don't like discipline either. Well, it turns out, where you want to be, Langdon? There's no way to get there except through discipline. Do I want to be in a different place? Okay, that's the first thing. All right, so utterly dependent on God. I need to have good godly disciplines in my life. Do you know what the third thing is? This is what my vineyard looked like last Sunday. Bird netting. Now look at those luscious grapes. I'm pretty psyched. If I did not have bird netting, and if I did not put it up at the right time, which was a month ago, if I had not put that up, every single grape you see there would be gone. Every single one. The birds would pick it clean. They would steal it. They would rob it from me. So think about this. I could have the best soil, best sun, best rain. I could be doing all these disciplines, training up the leaves. But if I don't protect the vineyard from the birds, all that other stuff is for naught. I will lose it all. I have to refuse the birds. I have to set a boundary that keeps them out of the vines. So, what's the kind of bird netting you need in your life? What steals the fruit in your life? What are the things you are exposing yourself to, like I'd expose them to the birds? What are the things you're exposing yourself to that are stealing your joy, stealing your hope, stealing your dependence on the Lord? Right? A lot of things, that's why they pull us away. Things that steal your discipline. All right, I'll list a couple obvious ones, right? Like, are you looking at far too much of the news cycle, 24-hour news that's intentionally designed to rile you up? Are you too addicted to a YouTuber who is intentionally trying to addict you because that's how he makes his money? You got to keep coming back. How about the morals and values in our culture that are in direct opposition to what Jesus taught? Some of the morals of our culture are exactly what Jesus taught, but others are like poison. How about the accusing voices in your head? Think about the accusing voices in your head. They don't draw you 1 inch closer to Jesus. They actually draw you away down some lonely, dark hole. How about the desires to feel numb or feel anything at all that lead us into excess, which then leads us into shame, which then draws us again away from Jesus down a lonely, dark hole? I don't like bird netting either. I don't like this idea that I need any protecting. I want to say, no, man, I'm strong. I'm strong enough. I'm open-minded. I can take whatever the world has to give me. And I have these accusatory voices in my head like, what, are you afraid? What's the matter? Why don't you open yourself up to that? Why don't you open yourself up to that? What are you, a chicken? You sticking your head in the sand? No. Part of tending a garden or a vineyard is not making it a toxic waste dump. If you fill it with poison, nothing will grow. I don't have time to know everything and be exposed to everything. I also don't have the strength. So I have a responsibility to be the gatekeeper to keep the garbage out. You have a responsibility as to what you allow yourself to be exposed to. That's why Hebrews goes on in verse 12. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Oh, I guess I am weak. I guess I do need some protection. Make straight or level paths for your feet, so that the lame, what is lame in you, may not be disabled, but rather healed. So anytime you choose to walk in a path, it means you're not walking somewhere else. You're not being exposed to other things. You're picking a path and walking in it. And what kind of path am I to walk in? A straight and level one. Why? Because I've already sprained my ankle. Some of you love the wilderness like me. If you are out in the middle of the wilderness and you have a sprained ankle and you just keep walking on it in that treacherous land, what's going to happen? It's not going to heal. It's going to get worse. In fact, you might be permanently disabled. No, when you are wounded, you need to heal it so then you could go back into the wilderness. To me, this means I need to be careful, I need to be wise, I need to be very selective about what I let inside my head. Okay, that includes, what are the people I'm hanging around with? Are the people that I'm hanging around with pointing me to the good and the true and the beautiful? Or are they actually a lot more full of sharing their cynicism or gossip or despising or bitterness? Maybe even worse, am I doing that to them? What am I exposing myself to? I have a responsibility. All right, those are the three things. So how do we sum it all up? The three lessons from my vineyard are, first, to choose to be utterly dependent on God. It's all from Him. It's all gift. I need to start that way every morning. I need to walk in the path of good disciplines for my body and heart and soul. And I need to set boundaries to keep the garbage out. Now, this week, this occurred to me like, hey, this is 3 Ds. And you guys might think I kind of cheated on the third D, but it works for me. I need to be dependent on God. I need to be disciplined in habits. And I need to not expose my mind to garbage. Now, none of this is rocket science, right? Like this whole big deal, Langdon. This isn't that hard. It's pretty basic. Why do we need to keep coming back to these basics? Because of what we learned about in Genesis. Because we're broken and we're fallen and we're always drifting away. All of us are. It's the human condition. I need to accept it, turn into it, and do something about it. Listen to what the demonic tempter says about how to destroy a human being in C.S. Lewis's classic work, The Screwtape Letters. The demon says to another demon, here's how you do it. Exploit a most natural human characteristic, the horror and neglect of the obvious. Isn't that what we do? We neglect to do the things we know we should do. We find the very things that are best for us boring and unattractive. They don't sparkle and shine. And so we're horrified at the thought of being bored. And so we neglect exactly what we should be pursuing. And instead, what happens? We live in a fantasy world that is not rooted in the true vine. Now, think about those 3 Ds. And I want you to see how this dependence on God, right, that's a mindset. Not exposing my mind to garbage is a careful awareness, a gatekeeping function. And godly disciplines, those are habits that I keep the best I can. I'm not going to be perfect, but I try and keep this consistency that keeps me healthy and active and focused on God. Now, see if you can see those 3 Ds in these beautiful words of Jesus. In the paraphrase, the message, Matthew chapter 11, starting in verse 28. This is what he says to you this morning. Are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Then come to me. Get away with me, and you'll discover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. When we listen to Jesus and walk in his ways, what does it look like? Well, I would think it would mean that we would strive to live out the 2 greatest commandments he gave us, which were what? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, and love your neighbors as yourself. Those are to be my priorities. This is why our church is offering you practical ways to do both of those this fall. I want to give you a couple of them. First, love of God. Well, okay, I'm looking at the fall. Let's make it a habit to meet together for corporate worship in this place every Sunday this fall. Let's do that as we're practice this living in Psalm 23. Let's see what happens when we make this a regular, consistent habit, coming together. And then second, another easy way in the middle of your week, if you're not already, sign up for the Thursday 3. If you're new with us, every Thursday you'll get an email or a text for a 3-minute devotional, so that no matter how crazy your life is, you can fit 3 minutes in at the start of your day to do what? Remember your utter dependence on God. Okay, how about loving neighbor? Again, these are just 2 simple things we're trying to offer you to help you. The first is love my neighbor through mission. So we're going to do one-off missions through the fall. You just heard of the first one. We're doing the soup kitchen. You can be part of that. But second, and maybe even more important in this season in our lives, let's make it a habit to participate in small groups. Again, I'm hoping you experienced what it was like to do House Church August. Either way, if you did or you didn't, how about make this a discipline? Like, I can do this for these 6 weeks. Make this part of the way I do life for 6 weeks. And there's a whole bunch of different small groups. You can see faith in film, faith in marriage, some Psalm 23 small groups. There's going to be a prayer course. There's going to be a group for young adults. There may be more. By the way, if you're interested in helping and leading small groups, let us know. Let's do this for each other. Let's do it with each other. Finally, last thought. Whenever we talk about habits and practices, which is really important, we have to go back to that first D, the utter dependence on God. Why? Because if we try and do that stuff on our own, one more set of oughts, should, must, to do, check off, what happens? They either turn into bondage or they turn into self-congratulating self-righteousness. Oh, Lord, I thank you I'm not like other men because I do this, 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 this. We've got to have that all based on this utter dependence on God. So brothers and sisters, breathe in, breathe out. Put first things first this fall. Maybe this afternoon, take some time just to go, hey, what are my priorities going to be this fall? What do I want this fall to actually look like? What is God calling you to sow into your life this fall? One more time. What is God calling you to sow into your life this fall? The disciplines of Jesus will take effort and self-control and self-awareness, but they are always life-giving, always full of grace, always a true gift to us. Brothers and sisters, depend utterly on God. Have disciplines you pursue for your day, and refuse to allow yourself to let garbage come into your head. These are the ways of Jesus, and they are always life-giving, full of grace, and a true gift to us. Thanks for joining us today as we strive to think carefully about our faith. You can help keep this ministry on the air by making a donation at leverington.org. For now, may the Lord bless you and keep you. We'll see you next time.